Good morning. Welcome to Core Services in our Core Belief series, Why It Matters. Today we're going to be discussing internal control documentation, what boards should be looking for when it comes to internal control over their funds. I'm John Coggle and I am today's presenter. Before we get going, a little bit about Core Services. Core is focused on audit review services, primarily of condos, HOAs within Oregon and Washington. And we also offer advisory services where we help boards evaluate their work and their interaction with their management company and with their owners and determine how they may be able to more effectively and efficiently run their meetings. So, some thoughts about effective internal control. So a couple of things is you're always looking for segregation of duties. So there's no one person who has an overwhelming control of a transaction without some sort of break in it. So again, anybody who can start a transaction, approve a transaction, and ultimately decide if that transaction gets compensated. That's probably would be an ineffective segregation of duties. And what you're looking for is obviously an independent party is involved at certain points in that transaction. So again, especially towards the middle or the beginning, having somebody come in at the end may not be effective. You're also looking for the fact that decision makers are not involved in the entire transaction. So what you're looking for is that if an employee has the job of selecting vendors, they should not be in the job of also approving invoices, because again, they could select their own company as a vendor and approve their work, and maybe they weren't supposed to be a vendor and maybe they didn't do any work. The person who's approving the payment also doesn't approve the invoice, and I know in small organization this is kind of challenging, but it's a really important step. People need to be looking at that and say, hey, wait a second, is there an independent check and balance here? And then obviously, we're big believers in flowcharts and workflows. So again, what you want is document who does what in the organization, and again, preferably a flowchart, and I'll show you a couple examples. And what you're looking for is where things could possibly break down and what you could do to improve them. So obviously in a good workflow and a flowchart of in this case the budget process, you can see where we have identified who's involved in this. We have the board, the community manager, accounting, and maybe even the finance department if it's separated from the accounting department. And you can see where everybody has an involvement, and before things get finalized, the other parties have had a chance to weigh in and look at this to make sure that that no one has undue control, that whatever is being decided upon is being checked on by an independent party. So what we have here is an actual real-world example of a process where we went through and we wanted to document how things were flowing so we could explain this to the managers and the board why this probably wasn't a good process. So in this case, a community manager had the ability to determine the work to be performed and also had the opportunity to select the vendor. There was no approved supplier list or approved vendor list. So anyway, but so he had that the manager had sole discretion here, and then the manager could then create the service order for the work, sent that service order request to the vendor received it, and then performed the work, creates the invoice for the work once it's supposedly done, sends it back to the community manager who goes out, reviews the work, and then approves the invoice. Then once it's been approved, it goes into the accounting system where then the bookkeeper would prepare the payment to meet the terms, and then it went back to the community manager who had signing authority over most of those types of operating transactions, who signed the check and then mailed the payment back to the vendor. So, and we're trying to explain to them what could potentially go wrong here, and walking it through and speaking about it, or even writing it out and saying step one, step two, it's hard to visualize. And everyone was basically saying, oh, this isn't, this works. And then we came back and we helped them understand by documenting a workflow what was happening at these various levels. And so what we were able to point out is, look, the segregation of duties, the community manager has control over all the key processes. The community manager had the ability to select the vendor. There was no separate list that the vendor that someone could choose from. He got to choose whoever he or she felt was most appropriate. They then created the service order. So not only did they get to select the vendor, there was no separate process for creating that service order. So again, what could stop a community manager from selecting a non-existent vendor, their company, create a service order for it, and then allegedly submit it, and then it comes back? What's the next step? They review the work. And so, again, imagine that hypothetical transaction. They selected this hypothetical vendor. They allegedly sent over a service order. They say, oh, the work has been done, and then he says, I approve this for payment. Worse, they then have, because of the way this company was set up, they had the right authorization to sign the checks, and they ultimately mailed the checks. So you can see where, in this particular case, this was a huge breakdown in the internal control structure. Things could go wrong and it would not be caught. And this is one of the things you're always trying to avoid. Also, you'll notice that there was no ability here to go back and say, hey, wait a second, was this authorized by the budget? If the community manager said it had to be, then it automatically went through. So what was the point of the budget? The budget was essentially a year-end tool where they said, okay, this is how much we spent, we're going to use this as the baseline for the next year's budget. And that's probably not a good role for that budget. The budget is a control mechanism for the board. The board can look, the manager can say, hey, wait a second, I'm bumping up against the budget. I maybe need to get approval. So there needed to be a step in there that said, are we within budget? And if so, great, we can continue on. If not, what process steps need to go through with this? Accounting was making an assumption. If the thing came back approved by the manager, accounting set it up for payment inside the accounts payable system. So even accounting was not a separate check and balance. It basically, if it came in and there had the manager's initials on it, it was good to go. And then finally, other than again that creation of the budget, since there was no mechanism for to go back and after if it was over budget for the board to get involved to weigh in, there essentially was no board involvement until it was too late. So, and then on that vendor side, obviously, what you have is that do you have an approved vendor list? Is the selection of vendors limited by somebody who is properly vended them, especially for contractors? Are they licensed? Are they bonded and insured? These are very important questions when we're talking about bringing somebody into a community association and having them do work on community assets. So, again, it looked good, but when you really started asking yourself, why is this step happening and being performed by this person, you could see where there was a substantial risk that internal controls could break down. And we believe things need to change at that stage. You need to look at who should be doing these steps. And we realize that managers don't want to invest a lot of time, money, and energy into creating an organizational structure that potentially slows things down and costs money. But we argue that this is what managers are compensated to do. So we hope you found this informative. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. We have a contact form on our website, core-acct.com. Feel free to fill it out. I know it basically is designed for a request for proposal, but feel free to fill it out and send us a question. We would love to have conversations with people about issues that are germane to them. You can also contact me on Twitter, and you can find Doug and me on LinkedIn, and you can ask us questions through LinkedIn as well. Hope you have a great day. We look forward to presenting to you soon.